Similar to emotional intelligence, communication is also one of those very rich subjects about which a lot has been written. It was George Bernard Shaw who said the greatest problem with communication is the illusion that it's been accomplished. And that's a trap that a lot of us fall into. We think we've communicated, but actually we haven't. We learn to talk at an early age, but we may not always learn how to communicate properly. Communication is often the only tool we have to create relationships. It's what we use to engage with our business, with our team, with our customers, with our suppliers. And the more effective we can be in our communication, the more we can streamline our businesses. So we talk about effective communication, but what is it? Again, in a very simple way, if we have created understanding between the two parties involved in the communication, then communication has been effective. And I think we forget this sometimes. We worry too much about the kind of words we use. We sometimes fall into the trap of using jargon, which one party might understand, but the other might not. And so if we keep in mind that it doesn't matter which words we use, how well we speak the language, but literally just whether one has understood what the other person has meant, then we've created effective communication. It's also about remembering that it's not just about one person communicating to the other person. It's also whether the other party has had a chance for feedback. Feedback says that I can ask questions such as, did I understand this correctly? Is this what you meant? This means that both parties have to take a bit of time. Both parties have to engage in active listening. And so once communication has taken place, there's been room for feedback, and both parties have engaged in active listening, then we've completed the circle of effective communication. Let's think about communication as a tennis game. So in perfect communication, I hit the ball to you and you hit the ball to me. And so a beautiful tennis game is taking place. When communication goes wrong though, you, of course not me, hits the ball into the net. And that net can represent some of the barriers that we find to communication. But I would like to concentrate on another issue, which involves the concept of noise, and in this case, emotional noise. If we think back to emotional intelligence, if somebody is undergoing a very strong emotion, remember the thinking part of the brain, where communication takes place, is shut down, which means that in an emotional situation, communication is one of the first victims. So think about playing tennis. If I hit the ball to you, but in any way, from the way that I approach you, make you feel emotional. In other words, I make you feel insecure or I make you angry, then you might hit not only one, but many balls back to me. And this is where communication can go wrong. Let me give you a simple example. You know how husbands sometimes tell their wives that they're just going to go out for a couple of drinks with their friends and that they will be home by 10 o'clock. Now, as most of us know, people are not often home by 10 o'clock when they're having that much fun. So now they arrive home at 11 and they are very happy. They've just spent a whole evening with their friends, drinking a couple of beers and having a lot of fun. But they get faced with a tennis ball that says, "Where have you been?" Now, in that instance, the party that receives the tennis ball might feel insulted, or they might feel like they're being attacked. And so in order to preserve themselves, remember we fall back to fight or flight or freeze. In communication, we fight, flight and freeze by hitting a number of tennis balls back. And so these tennis balls might include things like, "But I was only an hour late. And anyway, you never let me do anything on my own. And anyway, don't you trust me?" Now, if you keep this picture in mind with all these different tennis balls coming your way, the tennis ball you choose to play back is going to determine whether this communication is successful or ends up in a fight. And if you, for instance, choose to play the trust tennis ball, you might end up in a whole discussion around trust, which is simply not the issue. And so in order for us to have effective communication, it is important for us to understand what we want out of the communication. In other words, begin with the end in mind, another one of the 7 habits of highly effective people. In this case, if we take a little bit of time to calm down ourselves, we would understand that the only issue here is that the other person should just let us know if they're running later than what they committed to. That's really the only issue. It's got nothing to do with anything, including trust. The ability to actively listen is a key ingredient in effective communication. Stephen Covey says that we must listen to create understanding and not listen to respond, which is in actual fact what most of us do. We need to remember that there's a difference between hearing and listening. Our ears take in every sound around us, but we have to choose to listen. We also battle sometimes to listen to people if we don't like them, because in fact listening to somebody attentively is to pay them a huge compliment. We give of our attention. And so we need to remember to choose to listen. We also need to understand that in order to fully listen, that's all we should be doing. We can't really listen and work on an email. We think we can, but we actually shouldn't. And so focusing on the person, listening with the view to understand, and sometimes having to bite our tongue not to interrupt or not to respond too quickly is a key ingredient. And active listening, again, if we picture it as a tennis game, means that we wait for the ball to come to us before we retaliate. And so active listening requires some form of rhythm, some form of calmness, and some form of intent so that we listen to others. It is also absolutely critical when we deal with clients. We need to walk into a client meeting listening before we talk. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time looking at these videos. And as we enter 2020, I want you to remember to look at the sign on the road that says there's hope ahead. Let's not focus on all the things that may have gone wrong in the past, but let's use this quote as our new beginning. And this quote says, no one can go back and change a bad beginning, but anyone can start right now and create a successful ending. And let's 2020 be all about creating that wonderful, successful ending for all of us.